Wait, you're still here? We just finished Unit 9. We're done with AP World. Oh wait, you're here to review and get ready for the actual AP test. Yeah, I forgot about that part. You want me to help you relearn the entire course curriculum in short 10 to 15 minute videos? All right, I guess. Here we go, let's do this. That's right, today starts our journey back through the AP curriculum to get you ready for the AP test, starting with Unit 1. Unit 1 is entitled The Global Tapestry, and it covers everything from 1200 to 1450 CE. That's right, for this course, we don't actually start at the beginning. Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Mesopotamians, forget them. We're starting at where historians consider the beginning of the modern world to be. And so the major theme of Unit 1 is what is a state and what is a modern state. And in this video, we'll talk about 3 ways in which we see the development and growth of modern states. First, we'll examine the process in which multiple different states throughout the world grow in this period. Then we'll break down the spread of 3 major religions and their contributions to state building. And finally, we'll look at examples of cultural transfer and exchange of technologies and new ideas around the world. Unit 1 covers 6 different regions of the world. Yeah, 6, and includes the different states that build within. The first and arguably the most successful of these is China. Around 1250, China was in the midst of its Song Dynasty, which is often considered to be the golden age of Chinese history. It's during this time that China experiences an unprecedented amount of technological and economic growth. Much of this was due to the organized structure that China had. It had something called civil service, in which different people could apply and take exams to get higher jobs within a bureaucratic system so that one person was not in charge of everything. This system was a result of the return to Confucian ideas, the ideas of Confucius that had been popular back in earlier dynasties in China. Confucianism valued things like the value and care that need to be put into relationships to be successful, as well as the concept of filial piety, respect for family and elders above all else. This moral and organized structure brought China back to basics, and it allowed the country to focus more on economics and technological growth, such as the introduction of a new type of rice called Chinampas rice, which grew faster and easier than rice in the past, allowing China's economy to flourish. Song China also pioneered new technologies like gunpowder and paper, which quickly spread as China embraced trade on the Silk Road and exchange with its new tributary states. Tributary states are typically smaller, more developing nations that have a relationship back to a larger, more powerful nation. In this case, a great example is Japan, which selectively borrowed much of China's culture and embraced it as its own. All right, I get it. You're high school kids. You want the short version. Here's what you absolutely need to know about Song China. Organized society, in return to Confucianism, allowed Song China to profit economically, especially when it came to agriculture. This time of peace and prosperity allowed China to be successful trading on the Silk Road, as well as influencing other tributary states to be like China. Meanwhile, while China's off vibing on its own, another empire is beginning to decline. And that's the Islamic caliphates of the Middle East, which had grown in the 600s to 800s under the leadership of Muhammad and the first few caliphs. But now that empire is beginning to fragment. The early caliphates of the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties allowed the Islamic empire to expand very quickly through violent militaristic expansion. At its height, the Abbasid Caliphate was arguably the most powerful empire in the world and was a center for technological, educational, and cultural transfer. Islam's dramatic and rapid military growth can't and shouldn't be ignored. It demonstrates the power that religion has as a unifying body. It unified most of the Middle East and a good chunk of Africa and even areas in Europe under one religion. But overall, the Islamic empires did focus on education and academic growth. Yet by 1250, the Abbasid Caliphate is beginning to decline. It just has too much land and too many people to rule, so it starts to see some different challenges to its rule. In Egypt, former slaves of the Abbasid dynasty called the Mamluks rebel and start their own sultanate in Egypt and North Africa. In Turkey and the Middle East, a group of nomadic Muslims called the Seljuk Turks quickly take over much of Abbasid territory. Wait, nomadic horse people, where have I heard that before? Yes, of course, the Mongols, I knew it. Yeah, there was a brief moment in time where the Mongols even captured the Abbasid capital of Baghdad, but we'll talk more about the Mongols more in Unit 2. Islamic influence quickly spread to India in what was known as the Delhi Sultanate, which quickly became its own independent kingdom. While Delhi became a rich trading state, it was dominated by conflicts between the native Hindu people and the new Muslim rulers. I know. What do you actually need to know? I'm getting to it. The Islamic caliphates, or the empires known as Dar al-Islam, grew rapidly during the reigns of both the Umayyads and Abbasids, but began to crumble during the 1200s. Such fragmentation led to three smaller but still Muslim kingdoms, including the Mamluks, the Seljuks, and the Delhi Sultanate. The Islamic kingdoms were very focused on their academic pursuits and became one of the most advanced civilizations in the world at this time. Muhammad was once a merchant, so therefore merchants and trading were a big focus of Dar al-Islam, allowing for greater connection between the Middle East and the rest of the world. Our third examples of state building come from Southeast Asia, which would technically include the Delhi Sultanate as well as some others. Like the Chola Kingdom, which brought structure and stability to southern India, and the Vijayanagar Empire, which served as an extension of the Delhi Sultanate, only with a little more of a Hindu spin. And there are other smaller island-based trading kingdoms like Sriravijaya and the Majapahit. All you really need to know about the southeastern kingdoms is that many of them were hotbeds for the spread of Islam and Buddhism, or they remained in their Hindu ways, and they were very involved in Indian Ocean trade routes. Again, we'll talk more about trade routes in Unit 2. If we turn our attention westward in the Americas, two kingdoms are beginning to really build coherent states. The first is the Aztecs of the Mexico region, whose theocratic state had brought organization to much of the continent. The Aztecs conquered much of Central America and used a tribute system to keep it under control. The Aztecs might be most famous for the belief that in order to fend off the apocalypse from their gods, they had to sacrifice humans on the tops of a pyramid. But they're also famous for a number of different technological innovations that really changed the world forever. For example, the Aztecs pioneered Chinampas, which were floating gardens that allowed for crops to be constantly irrigated. The Aztecs also brought more unity to Central America through their extensive trade network, which was traveled by a specific class of merchants called pocheta. Then in South America, there's the Incas. Who are the Incas? It's the people with the llamas from the Emperor's New Groove. The Incas from Cusco. Cusco's Incas. Right. The Incas are famous for their llamas because they needed them to travel the adverse conditions of the mountains of the Andes. Despite living in the mountains, the Incas were great builders, and they created an extensive road network that connected most of South America. But much like the Aztecs, the Incas found different ways to farm and produce crops that allowed them to survive. They also relied heavily on trading. Here's what you need to know about the Americas. Both the Aztecs and Incas had agriculture advancements that allowed them to produce crops like beans, corn, and squash. Both states had extensive trading networks that allowed them to stay in constant exchange with neighbors and also expanded their empires through violent conquest. Next, we'll turn and take a look at Africa, which honestly, there's not a ton going on in Africa at this time. There are a few growing kingdoms who are connected to trade, but one in particular, Mali, is becoming much more profitable than anyone else in Africa. Mali was strategically located and it profited off of the sale of gold, salt, and ivory. But we need to give credit where credit is due, which is to the Islamic traders who brought the camel and now provided a way to travel across the Sahara Desert. We will unpack trans-Saharan trade more in Unit 2. The result is that Mali got stinking rich off of trade. So rich that Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, was considered to be the richest person of all time. He was so rich that he decided to go on a trip and show everyone how rich he was. During his pilgrimage to Mecca, Mansa Musa actually brought so much gold into the European and Middle Eastern economy that he devalued gold, making every person in Europe and the Middle East say, "Whose Mansa is this?" Yeah, I keep growing it, but the puns are only going to keep coming. Anyways, here's all you need to know about Africa from 1200 to 1450. Trade. That's it. That's the tweak. We'll unpack this more in Unit 2. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, duh, Europe. How could I possibly forget Europe? You know what? Let's take a live look at Europe in the 1200s or so. I mean, come on, we call it the Dark Ages, people. But academically, culturally, advancement, exchange, whatever, it wasn't happening in Europe at this time. And as we're going to see, Europe had its own set of problems right now. In fact, it's one of the reasons why when we talk about the global tapestry, Europe doesn't get as much attention because it's so focused on itself right now. Wait, you're telling me that Europeans tend to be narcissistic and arrogant and only think about themselves? Yup! Ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, Europeans were looking for a sense of structure and stability. But this continental struggle for power only resulted in more division, which resulted also in the economic system of feudalism, which came to dominate Europe. Feudalism is really the original pyramid scheme. No, it's not a pyramid scheme, Jim. Let me show you. Okay, so the Pope got me and one other guy, and he gave us half of the land, and we can do whatever we want with it. Okay? The only condition is we have to find 3 other guys to help us out. And each of those guys needs to bring 3 other guys. It's a great system. I don't see how it could possibly be a pyramid scheme. Looks like a pyramid to me. It's a top-down structure where kings divide up land amongst different lords, who divide it among vassals, who divide it among serfs and peasants who work it, and in exchange, all of the proceeds end up going up the ladder. Even higher than the king, there was one authority that dominated in Europe, and that was the Catholic Church. The church was the surviving entity from the Roman Empire, and with that, it had control over everybody because the Pope supposedly spoke for God. In the midst of all of this, there will be different countries that are competing for God's favor and domination of Europe. France was fairly successful in expanding as it created Europe's first bureaucracy with the formation of a body called the Estates General. England also became more advanced with the signing of the Magna Carta, a document which limited the king's power. But the most powerful kingdom in Europe was probably the Holy Roman Empire, in which the emperor was actually crowned by the Pope, and because of its relationship with the church, the Holy Roman Empire believed it was God's true kingdom. So yes, in a lot of ways, Europe was fairly dark, even as we transitioned from the Dark Ages into the High Middle Ages. And in the midst of all of this, the competition between Great Britain, France, and the Holy Roman Empire especially is getting very fierce. There are numerous examples of different feudal wars that take place between warlords throughout Europe. And probably the most dominating one is towards the end of the 1400s, when England and France fight in a war that lasts over 100 years, the 100 Years' War. Here's what you need to know about Europe. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe was divided into numerous warring feudal states that were dominated by feudalism. And the Catholic Church remained as the highest authority, both politically and religiously. For the most part, European kings were hereditary in nature, and they believed that they had been selected by God. And overall, Europe remained relatively secluded from the rest of the world because it was worrying so much about its own problems and infighting. Now, obviously, there's more information that goes into those 6 examples of state building, but really, those are the core details that you need to know. The next major theme of Unit 1 is the spread of religions, and we see 3 major religions that begin to spread during this time. Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity will all see significant rises in popularity and spread to new areas around the world. Of the 3, Buddhism is by far the oldest of the religions, yet it starts to spread and take hold as it becomes more popular in China. Buddhism's ideas of peace and tranquility and focusing on the mind were very similar to some of the things that were promoted not only in Confucianism, but also the Chinese religion of Taoism. So as these religions start to merge, it starts to spread throughout Chinese territory. As trade intensifies on the Silk Road and in Indian Ocean sea routes, Buddhism will spread there as well with different types of merchants. On the other hand, Islam is the newest of these 3 religions, and its spread is tied mostly to expansion and conquest. Very early in the religion's conception, Muhammad had an attitude of conquering those who were not Muslim in order to spread Islam. And as we discussed already, the spread of Dar al-Islam brings that religion with it. But Muhammad himself was also a merchant, and therefore the Islamic Empire had a lot of trade going on, and as we said, that religion would spread via trade as well to places like Africa and even to places like India. And Christianity continues to spread as well, which has actually been a constant throughout the entire religion's history. Christianity now had access to Rome's waterways and roadways, which allowed that religion to spread. And the final aspect of Unit 1 is the overall transfer of both culture and technology that takes place during this time. For hundreds of years, technological transfer was usually based on nomadic groups. Think about the Hittites, the Phoenicians, and more notably, the Mongols. That is starting to change because of the growth of new trade routes. And we'll talk more about the Mongol moment in Unit 2, but for now, let's talk about some other examples of trade. As mentioned earlier, China's advancements like champa rice, paper, and gunpowder quickly spread to other places around the world. And the Muslim city of Baghdad was revered as an academic center for the entire world. Through exchange via the Silk Road and even an example of military conflict between the Abbasids and China, these technologies were eventually shared. Yet the best example of cultural transfer comes when these things finally reach Europe. When Pope Urban called for the Crusades, claiming that God wills it, and Europeans flooded to the Holy Land in attempts to take Jerusalem in 1099, Europeans' worldviews were opened up unlike they had ever been before. Despite the moral questions behind the Crusades and the fact that most of them were unsuccessful, the fact that Europeans now see all of the technology and all of the academic growth that is going on in the Middle East cannot be underestimated. The Crusades had unintentionally sparked a European desire for adventure and questioning of what was out there, causing many Europeans to flood east, like Marco Polo. As worldviews have been broadened, Europeans now turn back to classical styles of art and education, triggering a period of cultural rebirth that we call the Renaissance. On top of new technologies and different cultures that have changed Europe forever, the Renaissance plants a humanist seed in people, in which people are now focused more so on themselves and their economic gain, especially in Europe. In many ways, the Renaissance is the perfect stopping point for the end of Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, because from now on, Europe will come to dominate the rest of the world in a way that is unprecedented. That's a quick review of everything you need to know from Unit 1 of AP World History. Stay tuned for Unit 2 review coming soon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.